things. He graduated from PCDS in 1967 and worked at CGE from 1969 till 1986, and then worked at OMC from 1986 to 1989. He now works for Freedom 55 from 1990 to the present as a chartered financial consultant. He has been volunteering for various groups and organizations since 1966, and as a typical volunteer, he states it's too numerous to mention. He joined the Royal Canadian Legion in 1969 and received a Civic Award from the City of Peterborough in 1970 as for outstanding heroism. He was awarded a life membership in the Royal Canadian Legion in 1988 and served on City of Peterborough Council from 1988 until 1991. In 1998, he took on that onerous task of chairman for the Wall of Honor Committee and is still serving and still surviving from that. He has a daughter, Mandy, who is a registered nurse in Halifax, and a son, Brett, who is a student at Trent University. And we all know that he is extremely busy as he is running for the mayor of the City of Peterborough. The election is on November the 13th. So we're very honored that he could find time in amongst all of this to come and speak with us. But as Dave said to me this evening, he has two priorities. First of all, it's family, and then his respect and work to do with the veterans. So that means a lot. That tells you what kind of person Dave is. So it's my pleasure to ask Dave Edgerton to speak with us this evening.
Thank you very much. As you heard, I've been involved with the Royal Canadian Legion since 1969. I actually joined as an affiliate back then, and in '72 they changed it so sons and daughters could join. So I was fortunate to be able to transfer over as an associate because my father served in World War II. And I went up through the ranks and I was president. I've been president of the Peterborough Branch 53 Royal Canadian Legion 5 different times. But in 1998, Vi Smith was the president of the Legion, and she asked me to go and attend a meeting because the city was calling in groups to see about having millennium projects. So Vi said, well, Dave, you serve in city council, you know how they work in that, will you go? So I went down to the Outboard Marine OMC across the road where they have the Evinrude Center and sat in the meeting. So I came back and I said, okay, I was not on the executive at the time, I said, why don't we look at doing this? Because I've had different opportunities to travel in Europe and Australia and down the States and that. And so I suggested that we put up a wall of honor to recognize the men and women from the city and county of Peterborough that enlisted. So then that went through the executive in November of 1998. So then we proceeded. We formed a committee. It was an ad hoc committee that's still active today. And we said, well, what criteria will we use? Well, okay, the city and county. We tried to use the same criteria as they have for the cenotaph in Confederation Park. So the cenotaph in 1978 was restored and rededicated in '79 with the bronze plaques on. And Bob McElroy, who lived in Bridgenorth and was a chartered member of the Bridgenorth Legion, he was the head of that committee. And that's when they put the bronze plaques on, and they put the World War I names that were already there because it was for World War I. They added the World War II and they added Korea. But if you look at the plaque, the Department of National Defense considered Korea a conflict back in 1979. So when the plaque was made, that's what it says on there, Korea conflict. It wasn't until the 90s that they considered it the Korean War, and it wasn't until the 90s that they recognized the Merchant Navy. So there was one young gentleman, Franz Jensen, who was from Peterborough in World War II in the Merchant Navy. He lost his life. His name never went on that plaque because they didn't recognize him when they were rededicating that. So we looked at that criteria and said, okay, if they were born in Peterborough County, if they lived in Peterborough County, if they enlisted in Peterborough County, or if they moved here after discharge, but not 40 or 50 years after discharge. Because if you can think in World War I, a lot of the men actually went by foot or by whatever way they could. They went to Berryfield, north of Kingston, or they went to Valcartier in Quebec and signed up. And actually in Peterborough here, the 93rd Battalion started, and this is the original, a copy of the original register of the 93rd Battalion. And we have it in the Legion, but I think it's now been donated to the Centennial Museum and Archives. But it was in the Legion collection. The National Archives in Ottawa did not want the original, so I had a copy made, and then we took a digital camera And our Dayton made a digital copy of it, so we have it on a CD. But it shows everybody that volunteered and enlisted in the 93rd Battalion in World War I out of Peterborough. I also have the shipping orders. They shipped out of Peterborough, and X number of them went down to Berryfield, north of Kingston. And then they went on down to Halifax, so I have the shipping orders of who left Halifax with the 93rd. But as I mentioned earlier, as long as you're in the military, you did not have to go overseas. So a lot of the people, not a lot, but less than 50 in the 93rd Battalion stayed right here in Peterborough. But they still qualified because they had a regimental number. And then we went to, what time frame should we use? Okay, well, in World War I, the war started in 1914 and ended November the 11th, 1918. Every cenotaph across Canada is wrong for World War I. Every war memorial. If you go in and check the National, the museum, or the books of remembrance, they go from 1914 to 1922. Wait a minute, the war ended in 1918, but they go to 22. So we use the same time periods and same Second World War. The books of remembrance go from 39 to 47. But the war didn't end in 47, it ended in 45, and they demobilized in 46. Well, those are just some problems that you run into when you try to do a project. What criteria do you use? And not to omit anybody or offend anybody. So we set the criteria, and then we started collecting. So like I say, I took a copy of the book of the 93rd. I went down to the library. I went to the museum. It took me 2 years to get in the museum, by the way, back then. But I have other bits and pieces. The 21st Battalion. There's names in there and regimental numbers. How many people remember the West Clocks? The West Clocks in Peterborough, they used to put out books called the Tick-Tock. And they put their employees' names in. So the employees' names are right here, plus those that lost their life. The General Electric had pictures of people. There's other pictures that people have sent in. There's a postcard, and there's this gentleman from Peterborough. And like I say, there's different postcards. There's churches. The different churches have the names on. Knox United Church. There's a plaque in Knox United Church. There's one in George Street Church. There's one in St. John's Anglican. They have the different names on. I went through 7,000 Legion cards. I made up binders with names that I had and took them to the 14 Legions in Peterborough County, the Navy Club, the Air Force Club, and the Officers' Mess. And I said, here, check and see if we're missing anybody. Because we were trying to make sure that we wouldn't miss anybody. And then there's another article that was in the Peterborough Examiner, May 30th, 1916, 93rd Battalion, names and regimental numbers. We worked on it and we started fundraising. And I won't go into some of the details of the fundraising because a couple of things I lost money on personally, but we kept going on. And this went on for about 4 years. And then we were asked by City Council, what was the status of the project? Because originally we went to the Parks and Recreation Board because we wanted to put it in Confederation Park. We went to PACAC because the park had been designated. And we went back to City Council. So we made a presentation. At that time, Councillor Clark asked the city to consider donating $10,000 toward the project and to send a letter to the county to see if they'd match it. The city put in their $10,000, the county put in their $10,000. To date, we have over $106,000 sitting in a bank account waiting to proceed. Well, then we run into some problems. Well, we knew when we started that it was a cemetery. In fact, it was 3 cemeteries. I have the maps here somewhere. There's a picture here. You can't really see it, but it just shows in this middle section here, that's the army barracks that they put up, the drill shed. But that was the whole block, that was the 3 cemeteries. The front part was general, the middle was Roman Catholic, the back part was Anglican. According to our source documents, the Anglicans never buried anybody in their section. They sold it off and they started to build houses. And here's another map here from 1820 to 1840, the land of the shining waters. That's in that book. We have another map. I just have to pull it out here. And it's quite interesting. This was done by a gentleman that we all know, and the time clocks are going to change this weekend because of him. Sanford Fleming. This is out of Trent University. And right on the map it says here, closed by order of town council, burial ground. Okay, so we talked to cemetery people. And they said, if a cemetery's been closed, then this is the rules and regulations you must go by. So we said, fine, we don't want to disinter anybody, you know, or disturb anything at all. And said, okay. So we come up with some engineers. And we figured, okay, the wall's going to be 120 feet long, 5 feet high, 5 inches wide. Said, what can we do? Well, the engineers come in at no cost to the city. The Granite people come in at no cost to the city. We had an archaeologist sitting with us. Said, here, if you happen to find any skeletal remains, and they're less than 3/4 of a body, you put them all together, and you take them to an open cemetery and put them in the consecrated ground and put a marker on them. That was our understanding 7 years ago. So we made arrangements to have plots at Little Lake or Highland Park. Okay, well then it got to the situation where the 5-inch wall was a building, according to certain people. So if you're going to put a building in a cemetery, you had to go 45 feet to make sure that you disinterred anything in 45 feet. So they never did legally settle that. They never have legally settled whether or not the cemetery was closed. And we have documentation. This is out of the Peterborough Review, and Mr. Conger was the mayor at the time, and it states right in here that he's going to bring a bylaw forward at the next meeting to close the cemetery. And to me, when it says close the cemetery, I can't spell the English any better than that. And I'm not being smart here. And saying, like, here's the deeds for the land. Gina Bassiano Martin was on PACAT, and she worked with Martha Kidd to designate the park. And they had the documentation. A year ago, April, I was out here to the Lakefield Legion because they had the dedication for the handicap accessible, and Neil Cathcart was there. I walked up to the warden and I said, Neil, do you mind if we put the wall in your half of the park? And, what are you talking about, Dave? I said, well, the park was deeded to the town and the county of Peterborough in 1905, and the records at the Land Registry Office never had it transferred to anybody else. So it was still the town and the county. Same with Victoria Park, belonged to the town and the county, even though the city incorporated in 1905. It was just before that this was done, in May of 1905. So we've had some interesting experiences. But as I mentioned earlier, we brought in the engineers, and we surveyed the land. So if you can picture from that beam to this beam, that's where the two light standards are on the outside of the cenotaph. That's about 120 feet. The ground drops off from over there to over here, the 120 feet, 12 inches. We could put a steel I-beam in and go down 18 inches, so that means at this end we're only going to go down 6 inches without disturbing anything underground. And it was a stamped engineering drawing, and people said, no, we don't want that. Well, these people have been putting up granite walls for 100 years. Anyway, we proceeded on, and then they said, okay, we're going to apply to close the cemetery. So the application went in, and it was sent up to Michael DeMello, a one-man cemetery board that looks after the whole province. And documentation was sent up. In fact, the veterans at one time, almost 2 years ago, said, Dave, don't worry about it. Tomorrow the trench will be dug. We dug enough of them in World War II. And I said, don't be doing that. You know, like, said, no, we'll be there at sunup. They said, no, stop. You know, but they ended up starting a petition. I did not start the petition. They started a petition. In less than 15 days, there was almost 3,000 names on the petition without going out to all of the county. And then it went to City Council. So in May of 2005, City Council unanimously passed a bylaw saying that the Wall of Honor would go into Confederation Park, and that they would have staff work with the Wall of Honor Committee to proceed. Well, we're now a year and a half later, and we're no further ahead than we were a year and a half ago. But we're still plugging on, we're still raising money. But just to get back to the different names in that, like we were doing fundraising, and our date, I don't know, some of you may have remembered, about 3.5 years ago, I used to coach the 10-pin bowling at Lakeview Bowl, and my son bowled 10-pin. So he'd go on the internet and look at Guinness World Records, and I said, well, Dad, why don't you bowl to break the Guinness records? So we sent him an email in January. Said, you know, we're going to bowl 2,002 games of 5-pin. Well, no, we don't recognize 5-pin. Canada is one of the few places that we bowl 5-pin. Said, but would you consider bowling in the 10-pin marathon? So the record was 37 hours and something. So Gus Schultz is a good friend of mine, and Gus donated the bowling alley, and I proceeded to go down there on the Mother's Day weekend. And once I started on the alley, I couldn't leave for 8 hours, even to go to the washroom. At the end of the 8 hours, you had a 15-minute break. So I proceeded to, and I broke the Guinness record for the 10-pin bowling, and we raised $6,000 that weekend. And that's when Art Dayton and Sue Kyle were there, who have belonged to CARA and they belonged to the Trent Valley Archives. And they were taking pictures of that because they were putting up websites for the Lakeview Bowl and that. Said, Dave, why don't we put a website up for the Wall of Honor? So that's when we put the website up. And I have sheets here for anybody that would like to go into the Wall of Honor website. It has the criteria on it. It also has, it has World War I, World War II, Korea. On the right-hand side, like my right-hand side, if you're looking at its left side, it says research enlistment papers for World War I. That links right into Ottawa, and it's a lot easier to go through that link than to go through the Veterans Affairs. And on that link, there's 670,000 names. When you go in there, you can print off the person's attestation paper. And I had a couple of copies here. And others here in the room have done that. Okay, there's the attestation paper from World War I, and it shows the person's name and where they're born. And it's interesting when you look at this. It says Orpington Road, Brownton. Brownton Post Office. Back then there were post offices. Brownton was really the south end of Peterborough. Okay, so they have other post offices that were down, like Villiers, the village of Villiers. That was a post office in that. But what most people don't realize, especially younger people, there's a World War I attestation paper, but it says drafted. If you were to ask most of the younger people today whether or not Canada had a draft in World War I, they would say no. They wouldn't know. There's a gentleman there that lived at 475 Park Street in Peterborough. He was drafted. So by going through the National Archive database, I went through over 17,000 attestation papers. I have downloaded over 3,000 that are people from Peterborough City and County that are now on a disc that verifies source documentation that they belong on the Wall of Honor listing. I also have the names of those that lost their life, and I'm just going to digress for a second. About 4 years ago, they decided they're going to retrofit the Memorial Center. Well, for those that used to go to the Memorial Center, up above the hot dog stands, there was the plaques for the different regiments. And they were up there, and at one time, I think probably 15 years ago, we had them refurbished because the steam in that was taking and peeling off all the varnish in that. When they decided to retrofit, they took them down, they took the case with the bagpipes and the drum in it from the SD&Gs, they took the case with the bell in it, and they stuck them in a trailer. Well, then the veterans got upset, so I ended up being at a meeting because I was president at the time, and they wanted to know if I would chair a committee to see about restoring the plaques and that. So when they opened up the Memorial Center, rededicated the official opening, the plaques weren't there. So we said, no, we're not going to have them ready in time. And we're not going to put them up and disgrace anybody that was in the military. So we furbished them all up, and Gary Smith, who comes out to Lakeview Legion as their memorabilia, he refurnished all the plaques up. But we put a plaque up there that was missed, one for the 57th Rangers that started before Confederation. And we have the badge on the plaque that they served under Queen Victoria, because we had one of those badges and we had it made at the foundry. We also put one up for the Merchant Navy at the far end. And the other two, the one says British Empire Service League, that's what the Legion was back in '58, so at the other end it now says Royal Canadian Legion. The two cases that were there, we had the drums, we had them re-roped, the bagpipe had been sitting in there since 1958, the bladder and the cloth had almost rotted. We sent to Scotland and got brand new cloth and the bladder for the SD&G colors. And then Joe Sullivan ended up giving us a beret with the SD&G red and white checkers on it. That went into the case. We had another case built, and Bill Judge, who's the president of the Air Force Association, donated his Air Force memorabilia, and that's in the case at the Memorial Center now. If you go to the other side of the door, there's the wall there with gold plaques on it. They're the names of the people that lost their life in the city and county of Peterborough. And we use the same criteria as the National War Memorial Museum used. Those names have all been verified for World War I. I have their attestation paper. I have a copy out of the Book of Remembrance. I have a copy out of the Commonwealth War Graves where they're buried, or there's a plaque remembering them. And we corrected the spelling of that because the Peterborough War Memorial was good intention, but they didn't have the technology we have today. So in 1928, all these names went in the paper and said, if you think a name should go on, please send it in or phone it in. And that's when they had the old 4-digit phone numbers, Riverside, RI, 4-digit phone numbers in Peterborough for those that ever lived in Peterborough back then. And even back in the 50s. We researched them all. Frank Dobbin, I don't know if anybody's gone into the Peterborough Library to look at his books, but he has books in there, and he was the procurement officer and looked after military stipends in World War I. So he has listings there of people that came through the area and they were given money. But he also has listings of the casualties for the city and county. His listing has 401 names in it. The Peterborough Cenotaph has 631 names in it for World War I. The first two gentlemen on there, George Abold and Louis Abold, were from Norwood. I have their attestation papers. George died in Toronto in 1967. But people didn't realize, because there was no criteria, I went through the 8 years of minutes, there was no criteria for what name should go on the cenotaph. And no disrespect for them. But like I say, people send in names. Ken Dormer's grandfather, buried Little Lake, died in 1927. His name's on there. Cecil Duncan Mather from Mather's Corners. He died in 1954. His name's on there for World War I. So we researched them all, and if you ever go into the Spitfire restaurant, I actually give the gentleman there the disc, and he put a plaque up with all the names on. That's the verified, accurate plaque from the Books of Remembrance and the Commonwealth War Graves, is what that is from. And for World War II, we actually have copies of the death certificates with the instrument number on from the province of Ontario. And we don't know how they ever issued them without a body. But they're there with the names on, but they have the instrument number on them. But that's just digressing a bit. But it's been interesting going through information for the Wall of Honor. George Elliott, local artist, he did a picture for us. So there's the armies, and there's the cenotaph. If you were to go into Peterborough and stand out at the front, the cenotaph, this bottom part right here, is more than 5 feet high. The flag is back here. The wall would be 84 feet back of the cenotaph. So if you were to look at the cenotaph, there's the base of the cenotaph. The wall would come here. You wouldn't see it if you looked straight on except for the wings of it. So it's not going to take away from the cenotaph. We had no intention of doing that. And we have some people that were in World War I and World War II. We have some that were enlisted in World War II in Korea. Their names will go on twice. We have 17 nursing sisters from World War I. We have veterinarians from World War I. We have Dr. Cameron, and he was in the medical corps. But those names are all there in our list and our documentation. So we've been researching it, and we've been verifying names, and more people have been sending in pictures. If they send in a picture, we can take the picture, and we can put a history of them on there. When they were born, their rank, their regimental number, if they passed away, if they went overseas, or any military history, their wife's name, their children's name. Now, we only put the first name of the children because it's a female, and all of a sudden they were married, now they're divorced. We'd have to go back in and take the last name and change it or take it off. So we said no last names for the children, just their first names. You know, but we can take any size picture. Like some of these pictures, there was 3 and 4 people in the picture, but we have the photo smart that we can cut them out. So we do that, and like I say, we ask for a donation. I'm just going to digress again for a second, because this is quite interesting. How many people know how you end a war? Well, there's a sheet of paper that was sent to the front lines, May the 5th, 1945. Forthwith and cease fire, 0800. Further details to follow. That's what they sent up to the front line, to stop the war. Sheet of paper on a dispatch. I found that quite interesting. I have other documentation. There's a book here that the lady in Peterborough, her husband was in the Navy in World War II, and he'd passed away, and she phoned me up and said, Dave, you may be interested in this. When you open it up, the front page, Canadian Navy list, officers of the fleet, May 1945, restricted. Okay, but her husband kept it after the war. So I made a copy of it, but it lists every ship in 1945 and who was on it and their rank. So it shows you who was in the Navy on that day, and they made them once a month so they could forward the mail to them. But it was interesting, because inside the book there was 2 slips of paper. The one slip of paper was from the jewelry store where her husband had bought her wedding ring and had the price on it that. And I put it back in the page, and when I took it back to her, I mentioned to her that, you know, there's a bill in there for your original wedding ring. And she never even knew it was in there. But like things like this, and same like the Durrell book. There's names in the Durrell book. There's names in other books of the townships and that. Like North Monaghan, I have names of people there that were in the military. So we've been going through and checking them. But what it comes down to is, all the names we have will be verified in Ottawa. I have 2 people in Ottawa that's working with the Department of National Defense that are verifying names for me. And in fact, they send me the other shipping orders. Like I said, like here's the Hastings Prince Edward. There's the PPCLI for World War II when they shipped out the 1st Battalion of them. I have all their names in there. The regimental numbers, they're all on there. So it's quite interesting. There's another copy, the Peterborough, when it was launched in Coburg, and the one gentleman was from Peterborough. These are in old newspapers. Like I say, there's just so much information. There's a proposal of where the wall will go. So here's the existing sidewalk, cenotaph flagpole. And then there's a couple of trees there, and then there's the wall right here with the sidewalk coming out. And it'll be 5 inches wide. And they did a study. City paid for this study. And people were saying that the cemetery was full. It was overfull. That's why they're looking at moving it. No. These little gray marks, they indicate where there was a grave shaft that may or may not still have skeletal remains in it. So the area we're looking at going on, there's 10 possible grave shafts that may or may not have something in it. When they put the cenotaph up, and Max Comstock passed away last year, they removed 28 skeletal remains. When Ken Downer dug the hole for the flagpole back in the 80s, they found 1 skeletal remain. When they did the Peterborough Collegiate Vocational Institution gymnasium that's on the side of the building, it's 96 feet by 120 feet the outside. They found skeletal remains that would fit in a banker's box that's similar to one of the papers, you know, the boxes you get for the paper. That's all they found in that whole area. But 8 years ago, when they decided to fix the armories and the foundation, they found 12 partial and full skeletal, not a full, partial skeletal remains at the armories, at the base. Those skeletal remains are at Trent University. They're using them in their studies for the archaeological department. They got permission from the province. A year ago, August, they went in and dug up the PCBS parking lot. They didn't close the cemetery, they didn't apply for anything. They just went in, dug it up, and resurfaced it. Okay, when they done the armories, they didn't apply for closing, they just dug it up and fixed the walls and moved the skeletal remains. And like I say, we have no disrespect, we're trying to go by the rules. But that's where we're at with it. We did a couple of other fundraisers. We have keychains for $3. We have a CD, and there's George Eliot's print on it, that Danny Bronson sang the song. We have them, and like I said, we have the George Eliot picture for sale. But if somebody could help me just for a second. This is what the wall would look like with a pillar in between every so many feet, and the names would be on both sides. And there's space on the top and space on the bottom so that if we did miss somebody, their names could be added in the future. So this is, like I say, there's the cenotaph, there's where the wall would go. Okay, now, at the entrance to the cenotaph, or at the entrance to it, at each sidewalk at the end, this would be, there's the wall, and there'd be a plaque here saying this is the Wall of Honor, what it's all about, and then there'd be a walkway on both sides. So teachers could bring the students down, individuals in wheelchairs or the scooters could go around it. There'd be benches there. But that's what it would look like with a little space in between. Now, the granite, when it's glued together, you couldn't knock it apart with a stick of dynamite because it would break because of the new technology and the adhesive they have for granite. And like I say, we looked at a steel I-beam and then we're going to put arms out on it, but they turned that down, but we're still not finished. But that's where we're at with the Wall of Honor, and I do carry this book with me every day. We have the website, and I have sheets here, but it's www.wallofhonor.com. But I have all the names in here, and then people give me names, I write them down, and then when I get a chance, I go back in and put them in, and then they go on the database. Same when people send in pictures. There's 2 volunteers that take the pictures. And the one lady that was doing it, she was in the hospital for about 4 weeks, so she didn't do it for about 7 weeks because she, had some health problems. But she takes them and she puts them on. And then I try to make a copy and say, is there any mistakes? Well, there was a mistake with this one. This Mr. O'Connor, his son Patrick sent it in, and his name was Leonard. Well, Patrick is now Leonard. But we'll correct that because it was just on a sheet of paper, like I say, that you fill out. But we usually, we take the picture back, say, here's the picture back. Is there any mistakes? Let us know. and a couple other people wanted some changes. But like I say, we've run into a couple of problems where there's been a second marriage. Do you want to mention the first wife or no? Or do you want to mention the stepchildren? Or the... So it's been interesting, some of the rules we've had to sort of lay down with people, because when somebody sends in the information, it's confidential. I've had people from all over the world, from England, from Finland, from Norway, email me and want to know information. And I'm just going to wrap this up very quickly here, but the one interesting email I had almost 3 years ago was from a gentleman in England. And he said, "Do you know so-and-so?" I said, "Well, yes, I know the name." He said, "Well, he died in 1984. Can you find out if he's buried in Peterborough?" So this was August. We couldn't find him. They came over in October and they were in Oakville. So they phoned me and said, "No, we haven't found him in any of the cemeteries in Peterborough." And on our date, went to St. Peter's Cemetery and took a digital picture of every tombstone that was in St. Peter's Cemetery. So that's on a CD. So anyway, these people went back to England, and a week after they left, we found where this gentleman was buried. He was buried in the Emily Cemetery. Okay, and when I saw the records, I said, "Well, he's related to the Bronsons." Well, Becky Bronson worked at City Hall, so I went over to Becky and said, "Becky, this fellow in England is a relative trying to get in touch with you." Because Becky's mother was related to, and well, Becky's uncle, George, was up from Nova Scotia. Okay, he just happened to be there. So they ended up phoning these people in England. And that was 3 years ago. 2 years ago, those people come over and met their relatives, and they found them through the website. So that made me feel good. And other people sent emails saying, "Well, so-and-so, my grandfather, I didn't know he was even in the Canadian Army, and he lived in Peterborough," because they went through and found the attestation paper. But that's what we're working on. Like I say, we're over $106,000. We're still taking names, still trying to verify. We do have space, once the wall goes up, to put names on if they're missed. If there's any questions, I thank you very much for your time and patience sitting here. Any questions?
Is it going to go?
It will eventually go up. We won't get into some of the controversy. That's not why I'm here tonight. But it will go up. It will go up, and it'll be recognized. And like I say, and then eventually I will be doing a book on all the names of those that lost their life. I was talking to a couple of the others earlier. I have the names of the people from Peterborough County that went to the Red River Expedition. I have the names of the people that were in the Northwest Rebellion. I have the 20 gentlemen that trained on the Otonabee River to go to the Sudan. I have the 2 contingents that went to the Boer War. And then I have World War I, World War II in Korea. I have all those names, and eventually they will be preserved. If something happens to me, my daughter knows to turn them over so that all that research is not going to be just thrown out. And then we have been backing it up. We've been putting it on CDs. So there's going to be a lot of historical information. In fact, the government of Canada, our website, they download it once a month. We know who goes in from where. And when we first set it up 4 years ago, in the first 5 months, there was over 3,000 people went into it. And we know if they're going into World War I, World War II, or Korea, if they're going in, we have the cenotaph on there. We also have military medals on there. So, like I say, down the left-hand side, it'll show the military medals. And we're saving pictures also. We have pictures of those that lost their life. There's pictures in the Examiner. There's pictures in the book by Alan Thorne from PCBS. He put out a book of the students there that lost their life. We have those pictures, and we're saving them, and eventually they will go on the website. And that's preserving more history. And we have a history on them. Same with, they put the plaque up for the Quaker Oats on Monday. Well, the Parsons, there's a Parsons on the cenotaph. And Gina Bassiano Martin did the research, and Gord Young helped out, but Gina's been working on this for 30 years. And she's going to eventually put a book out about the people that lost their life in the fire. But I passed her on to the names of people that are in Peterborough related to the Parsons. So she was talking to them, and then the day of the unveiling of the plaques, she couldn't believe the people that had pictures in that. And she has all their names in that, and she'll do the research, and she'll eventually put a book out on it. But yes.
May be interesting to know that at that ceremony last Monday, there was a family there who had heard about this happening a week before, and they brought a great-grandson of one of the men who was killed.
Yes, yes. No, as I say, it was quite moving for the people that were there. And the Quaker Oats Pepsi people didn't realize there was going to be many people as there was. You know, but give them credit. They're a good corporate sponsor. They did go ahead with it, and they did do it, and they recognized it. But is there any other military questions? Because like I say, I do have sheets. These are sheets that I put together that I'll hand out to anybody who wants them. It shows, you know, where you can get military history. The Centennial Museum, Trent Valley Archives, CARA, the Wall of Honor, the Commonwealth War Graves, Collections Canada, Veterans Affairs Canada. Legion Magazine actually has the last post. If you go through the Legion Magazine website, they have the names in the last post of those people that remembers. Civilization, VIMI, the Royal Canadian Navy Volunteer Reserve. These are all different places. And there's also a website for the 57th Regiment. George Allison in California, who was from Peterborough, he has that website on. And there's another gentleman that I was emailing through in France. He's taken and has pictures of people that were in the Canadian Force, and he has their pictures up there for the ones that lost their life at Vimy. So there is a lot of military history on the web if you know where to go. But if anybody wants one of these sheets or one of the ones from the Wall of Honor, let me know. Or if you want to check a name, like I said, I carry the book with me. But again, I thank you for your time.
Dave, you speak with passion, you speak with commitment, and we are ever so grateful for all the work that you have done and continue to do in amongst everything else. And it will inspire us to do further research too. So thank you so much for everything that you have done in memory of the veterans. And for coming this evening, it's such a busy time.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
I can just speak personally about the Wall of Honor and doing the research. After I heard Dave speak at a genealogy meeting, I did make use of the websites that he had, and they were very, very informative. And I did fill out the sheets, which you can fill out if you do have a family member that you would like to make sure that they do have their name on the Wall of Honor, or whether you want it put into the website so that then you can continue to look for any pictures or attestation papers or discharge papers and that sort of thing. And I continued to do a bit more research too and was able to find enough. And I just printed off so you would see what it looked like, a copy of what is on the website just concerning my parents. And they do a very good job. They have the picture with the information about what they did. And in fact, some of you that know my mother, she was not born in Lakefield or Peterborough County, but she served in the war. And as soon as it was ended and she married my father and moved back to Lakefield, then she in fact did qualify too. So that's why her name is. So when you think back in your family history, you will have people that you didn't realize should be honored and remembered, because I wouldn't be here, standing here, if it wasn't for all of the veterans. And the veterans that are even here today, we're ever so proud of everything that you did. Now, another thing to, yes?
Okay. Sandy, I just like mention, like Sandy mentioned earlier, on the 4th of November, there is still some tickets available for the Peterborough Singers during the concert at Calgary on Lansdowne Street. It's the old Johnson & Johnson Surgical Building. And it's the last year they're going to do the World War II songs. So there's tickets available there. It starts about 2:30. But also on the 7th of November at the Peterborough Armories, the Department of Veterans Affairs, every year, the week before Remembrance Day, they have like an open house with different displays and that. I will be there. There'll be others there from the Legion, the Navy Club, the Air Force, and I think Bill Hite from Vimy Ridge Gallery will be there. That's open to the public on the 7th, starting about 9:30 in the morning. And I thought I'd just mention that to you if you wanted to go in and look at some of the military history there. Sorry, Sam.
Oh, no, I was going to ask you about that. I was hoping that some people would bring memorabilia this evening to share about something to do with the history of their family. And I set up a little display just of things that I had on my parents. And one of the things was a book that was written by a gentleman who was a prisoner of war to do with the Air Force, and this prisoner of war camp was in Germany. And there were two prisoner of war camps specifically for the RAF and the RCAF. And in fact, those were the ones that were referred to in the movie The Great Escape. So in this book, as I saw it at the War Museum, I opened the book up, and serendipity, I open up to a page where there is a diagram of one of the prisoner of war huts. And I'm looking at the diagram and I see the beds that are there and the little place where they eat. Well, then they labeled the beds. And being a very quiet person, when I saw the label Bob McCracken, I went, oh my God. Well, a little louder than that. And so here was a little story about why my father ended up being in this prisoner of war camp. And also, I have this little autograph book, which he kept and had the prisoners of war sign that. And with the joy of internet, I was able to look up on the internet this particular prisoner of war camp. And it shows you the pictures of what the whole camp looked like with the huts and lists the names of everybody in it. Another thing I brought was part of his Air Force uniform had one of the buttons, and all the buttons, the brass buttons, do say RCAF, but one of them, you remove the brass section, and underneath it was a compass. So that was used if they ever needed it. Well, unfortunately, I think I have my father's sense of lack of direction, because when his plane, his Spitfire, blew up and he parachuted out and landed in the woods in northern Germany, he ended up going into the Gestapo headquarters, the wrong direction to take at that point. So that was not a good thing to have happen. I also copied out his entire logbook. It's just getting too fragile to have out in display, but it's interesting. He's talking about when he's going over, flying over Holland and seeing the flat below and the troops and all the different things that were happening. And of course, anybody that knew Bob McCracken in Lakefield, he did have a tendency to drive a bit quickly. And so in the logbook, he was reprimanded for taxiing too quickly when he ended up back near Dover, and by golly, he crashed into a lorry. So he was reprimanded for that. I also have the discharge certificate for my father and also for my mother, because my mother set up a hospital in Newfoundland, and she was a nursing sister with the RCAF, and in fact that's how my parents met. And there was this one time when my mother had the job of delousing somebody who came in with long hair, and the hair was full of bugs, which the nickname for them was Cootie. Well, my father, with his typical McCracken sense of humor, nicknamed my mother Cootie. And you will see a model back there of his Spitfire, and on the side of it, he had painted the word Cootie. And just out of some strange situation, I was in at the War Museum in Ottawa, and they were showing black and white newsreels of an air raid that was the squadron, the Grizzly Bear squadron, were taking off from Dover, and there was the Spitfire with Cootie. And I don't think anybody else would ever call it fiancé Cootie. I don't want to take over the whole night, because I want others to share their information, but I came across some letters today, and you may be interested in these because it does mention some people. Now, these are the typical fold-up light blue note paper that came back from the Air Force, I was quite moved by some of these, so I do get emotional, so God forbid that I should start bawling in the middle of one. I promise not to do that. Anyways, this one was dated July the 10th, 1944. I just think for people my age and people younger, it might just give an idea what it was all about. So this is one my father, Bob McCracken, wrote. It said, "Dear Mom and Dad and boys, just a note to let you all know I'm still well and hope you are the same. We're still on the same station, but he is waiting for his Spitfire to get fixed up." And and then it said, "Yesterday we were all sent over to another station air base to inspect the kits of some of the ground crew that just arrived. And the boys in the hut that I inspected were all from Mountain View, and most of them were there, and I was there. One of the boys was Mr. and Mrs. McCarthy's son up the street, so that must have been in McCarthy and Lakefield. So when you see Mrs. McCarthy or Jerry around, tell them I inspected her son's kit over here, and he is fine. He was telling me that his brother, the one that was home once, had it was just in Gibraltar now. So it just kind of gives you an idea of what they're talking about in their letters. Now, this one is dated March the 19th, 1945. Now, this actually, when I looked at his logbook, was 6 days before he was shot down and with his Spitfire. So this one says, "Dear Mom and Dad and boys, received your pictures and the lads' letters, and was sure surprised to see how young Jack and Dick have grown. They sure look cute in their outfits. Young Jack looks funny with his teeth missing in front. There isn't much doing here these days. I was supposed to fly a trip a few minutes ago, but my aircraft was unserviceable, so decided to drop you a line while I was waiting for my 2 ground crew to get it ready for me. The other day, we dive bombed a Gestapo headquarters and sure made a mess of it. It is nice and warm here now, but very crusty. All the trees are budded out and puts me a lot in mind of the spring back home in Lakefield. Dad, tell Dad I think he should send Cootie, my mother, his fiance, a picture of himself, just so she will know what she's getting into. The shock may be too great all at once, but while she is at the hospital that she runs, she could be well taken care of until she's recuperated." That's a McCracken sense of humor, isn't it? Now, this I found quite interesting. He was shot down in March, and then the war ended in May, and of course then he was released. And all throughout the time that he was in England, one of the fellows in his squadron was also from England, and he would go when he was on leave to visit this particular family. And the family were just like parents to him, and of course they had 2 daughters. Don't know if that had anything to do with it. But I found this letter really said it all. This is dated just after they found out, the people in England found out that he was still alive after the end of the war. And this letter was sent from Beckham, Kent, England, May the 17th, 1945. And this family wrote this to my Grandma McCracken. "Dear Mrs. McCracken, I feel that I must just write a line to say how happy I am to know that Bob is safely back in this country of England. Do you know I went with my husband down to our club last Friday evening, and there was a British Air Force boy there who had come from a prison camp, and he met a friend of Bob's. Well, amongst other messages that he sent me, he said that he had made a special call to Bob's squadron on the phone, and they told him that there was now little or no hope that Bob was alive. Well, I expect you can imagine how I felt. I just walked home in a trance, feeling that nothing else mattered and just could not sleep all night. And then all day Saturday, I could think of nothing else. Then on Sunday morning, about 11 a.m., the phone bell rang, and my daughter, Audrey, answered it, and I happened to be sitting in the room. I saw her face go very red, and she shouted, "Bob!" I could not think for the moment whoever it could be. As you can imagine, the last person I thought of was your Bob after Friday evening. Then she turned around to me and absolutely yelled, "It's Bob, our Bob!" He's safe and he's in England. He landed a quarter of an hour ago. Well, do you know, I just could not move from the chair. My legs just refused to function. And when I did get to the phone, well, silly thing that I am, I just cried. I think I can safely say that it was the happiest moment of my life, and I am sure my husband and 2 girls would say the same. It was just unbelievable. I still cannot realize it, although he has phoned us and we are quite sure after 6 or 7 times talking to him. He's coming to us tomorrow for 2 weeks leave, and then I think he's leaving for Canada. Isn't that just too lovely for you, Mrs. McCracken? Although I just dread saying goodbye to him, knowing that in all probability we shall not see him ever again. But we are all so happy for him, and that makes up for a lot. I sent 2 cables off for him on Sunday morning, one to you and to his cutie. I do hope that you got them in time for Mother's Day. You could not have a better present, could you, dear? We do not celebrate Mother's Day in this part of the world, but we certainly did last Sunday. Even now, I feel that I must see him in the flesh to really believe that he is well and alive again. He sounded very fit and cheerful on the phone. He phoned again this morning and spoke to my son, who has been home on a 48-hour leave, and they had quite a chat. I know that this letter is a bit disjointed, but please forgive me. I just feel that I want to tell you so much at once that is always a bad way to compose a letter. But still, I feel sure you understand. He told me that he had met quite a few of his friends who have been missing and are now safely back. There must be hundreds of them. They are all at a beautiful seaside resort on the south coast, billeted in a very lovely hotel, and the food is simply wonderful. They certainly should look after them, shouldn't they? How lovely that this wretched war in Europe is finished. We just cannot believe that we can go to bed in comfort and not worry about sirens. But still, it is funny how one can so easily adjust oneself to conditions, whether pleasant or otherwise, isn't it? I do hope that because Bob is coming back, we shall still remain friends and that you will write to me occasionally. Don't forget the pictures of you and Mr. McCracken and the boys. I should so like to have one. I will give some snaps to Bob to bring home. Bye for now, very fondest. And this was from the woman. I thought that really gave a good picture about what life must have been like for the families that even knew them. And then this one was dated May 26th, after that one was written. And I'm only going to read a bit of it. It was one that my grandmother wrote back to Bob, my father. And it says, Dear Bob, well, dear son, we are relieved that your letter arrived and that you are alive. I just can't tell you how happy I am that you are free. And this lovely family in England once again have seen you. I knew you would be worried if you were alive, and we were not knowing that. So we were very pleased to get the letter from the family in England. Now, the one thing that happened when Dad's plane blew up was that, first of all, he lost his saxophone. And then secondly, when he was captured, they removed any jewelry that he had on. And so this is what my grandma said about that. She said, don't worry, dear, about, I know that you were upset about losing your ring. And this was one that Grandma had given him as a youngster, and it has his initials on it, and that meant the world. But Grandma said, never mind your ring or watch, dear. They're making these things every day, but they're not making men like you every day. Not in my eyes anyway. So I just thought that was pretty special too. So that's just, you get a kick out of people that know some of the people in Lakeville that Grandma was giving some news and said, poor old Tiny Hill dropped dead on Thursday. We'll all miss him around the little store. Yes, we'll have a real good time up at the cottage this summer. And then they're talking about somebody that just got a new set of teeth. So he'll be able to have a good steak when you come home. So anyways, I just thought that was, and then apparently Grandma had someone that was a renter, this Ellis Simpson, and Ellis had a bicycle shop, and so Ellis let them use the bicycle shop so that the Jack and Dick could get on the bike as quick as ever and mail this letter back to Dad. So those are just some of my family recollections. And is there anybody else who would like to share some memories of what you have? Karen, have you got some things that you want to say from all the wonderful things that you did?
I think I said them all last month. Maybe Uncle Alvin would.
Is there anyone who has anyone that they want to mention that was in the war of any sort, or anyone that did something at home? Yes, Derek.
It might be of some interest locally. My father's brother, John, lived in. They were both raised in Lindsay, and as a young man, he enlisted in the Canadian Armed Forces when he was actually underage. I don't know what the age limit was then, somewhere around 19 or something like that. But anyway, he was younger than that. But he enlisted by using the wrong age. And next thing he knew, he was being trained as a pilot in this is the First World War. And he was sent to England. And he flew with Billy Bishop in the squadron that Billy was in. And he flew an old double wing, I think they call them albatross. Does that sound right? And there was a machine gun that sat at the front. And their job was to do reconnaissance primarily over the front lines in France. And these rickety old planes, it was really a challenge just to get them off the ground. And he wrote extensively in his letters home about all the various problems with this contraption, he called it. But later on, he was shot down. And he was in one of these prison camps in Germany. And he wrote home in code so that his father, and also there was a chum that he had, was also shot down, and he was from somewhere around North Bay. And so the chap from North Bay wrote his father, and John wrote his father, and Lindsay, and they wrote in code so that they could try and get through to them that they wanted compasses and hacksaws. And and I have the actual postcard that he wrote. And it's really quite interesting to try and decipher what it really says, because it says some ridiculous things. But anyway, my grandfather got the message, and he had a pair of Dak boots made on his size. In fact, in those days, everybody had a last at Dak shoes, and they had their own shoes made by Dax. And so he asked Dax to make up a pair of boots with a hacksaw in the blade, the hacksaw in the sole, and a compass in the heel. And so he shipped these off and tried to send a code note to son John to tell him all about this, to find the boots. But the letter was very, very late in arriving. And when he got the boots, he found they didn't fit, so he sold them to a German soldier. And then when the letter did arrive, he discovered that, he made a mistake there. So anyway, this was towards the end of the war, and he eventually got his boots back, and he and this chum from North Bay they did escape from the prison camp. And 2 days later, the war ended, and they were picked up and shipped home.
They bring the boots.
Don't know.
Story of the family boots.
My mother wrote this story, and it was printed in the Atlantic Advocate back, 25, 30 years ago.
Mike, you were just a little gaffer, but this is something different that, a lot of people wouldn't think of that happened during the war while you were in England. Just mention what you were up to at that point.
Think for a minute. Where are we going? I don't know if any of you have read any of Ben Wick's books, but Ben wrote one that was No Time to Wave Goodbye. And it wasn't until I spoke to him on CBC one day that it all came very clear to me that that's exactly what it was. I was 9 I was 9 in August, and war was declared in September. And my mother, under no circumstances, was going to let her little boy away from her. There was an air raid aeroplane spotted off the cliffs of Dover, and the air raid siren was sounded, and I was gone the next day. And I ended up south, halfway between London, Croydon and Brighton, on the edge of what is called Ashdown Forest. The little town was called East Grinstead, and it was completely circled with anti-tank traps. And virtually that was the beginning of steel scaffold. And that's what it was made out of. Not the scaffold we see today, but pipes and brackets, and they were large pipes and heavy, and they were all set up at an angle so the tanks could get up over them. And during the war years, we saw a fair amount of aircraft activity, dogfights overhead, and if you were in a shelter close to a house, it wasn't unusual to hear the clatter of shrapnel coming down onto the slate roofs. And I ended up in a grammar school and became more or less a prefect, and we had to look after kids, get into the air raid shelters. And if you were standing close to the door, you could watch some of this dogfight stuff. But when we came out of the air raid shelter, it wasn't unusual to see cannon shell holes all through the side of the auditorium. That was sort of standard fare. And one morning when I was going to school, it was a typical English morning, sort of semi-rainy and foggy, and I saw this plane come out of the fog, and it was like 1 block away from me. You could see the swastika on the side. I could see the pilot looking, trying to decide what he was going to do, and I saw the bombs drop out of the plane. This would be around 9-ish, I guess. And they fell right on the movie theater. If it had been later in the day, it would have been full of people. It was actually empty. It was never opened again. They just blew it completely to pieces. But we had the Canadians on one side of town, and we had the Irish Guards on the other. Nighttime at the pubs could get a little hectic, to say the least. There were, on a Sunday morning, you'd see quite a few windows taped up. They were a rough bunch sometimes, especially when they'd had a few pints, that's for sure. And East Grinstead Hospital was the first burn hospital for skin grafting, and the Canadians built a wing there, which was very important. And as kids, we were one of the countryside, and we'd see these pilots out walking, and boy, we as kids didn't take much notice of it. But, and we spend time talking to them, but they were really bad shape. And they didn't go into town particularly, but they did wander around the countryside close to the hospital. That's where I'd see them. But for me, the war years were extremely good. And I lived with a gentleman that ran the railroad station, and it was a north, south, east, west situation. He had a lot of friends, so there really wasn't a lot of shortage of food at that house. Eggs and butter turned up quite frequently. But
Mention what your dad did. What your dad did every night.
oh, my dad, for one reason or another, but primarily health, I think. He worked on the Home Guard, and he also taught air cadets aircraft spotting. And he did that for most part of the war as required.
He was up at night on the Home Guard.
Oh, well, yeah, he was a very quiet man. But I wouldn't envy a German if he came there close by. I think when the war was over, he was in the Home Guard. And he had 2 Sten guns, I think, and over 20,000 rounds of ammunition under the bed. And after the war, like any war, there's all groups and associations and meetings, and he got a knock on the door one day and somebody said, "Frank, what did you do with the Sten guns and the ammunition?" And he said that just where they were when the war ended, under the bed. He had absolutely no interest in it at all. And Dad, in his day, was a fair shot. He split a playing card with a .22 rifle. So, I think he'd have made a...
The house was bombed.
Oh, yeah, the house was bombed, yeah, that's for sure. But that was unusual. And
Oh,
there were a lot of houses bombed in those days.
yeah, but you
And
wanted
a
to
landmine landed just across in a park opposite our house. And I'm not sure if that was the night or not, but my mother had young kids, and I can't tell you which one. And she said it was the only time she ever panicked during the war. She grabbed the bassinet, and ours was like a walkout, 2-story with a walkout, and going down to the shelter, which was like a dining room table. It's made of steel with mesh on 4 sides. You just got in there and dropped the mesh. If the house collapsed, you were going to live if they could get to you in time. And she got the bassinet jammed across the stairway going. And she said that was as close as she came to panicking. But it was sort of strange, she said, when peace was declared, it was somewhat of a letdown, because you geared up for this day and night routine of air raids and fire trucks and everything. But when it all stopped, you wondered what you were going to do the next day. Oh, there's some of the things that went on, you think about it. There was no petrol, and Dad used to ride a bike around to anything he had to go to attend. He did a lot of electrical maintenance on buildings too. And one morning he was on his way to a job, and a doodlebug came over. Well, doodlebugs, as some of you may know, were destined for London. So you don't take any notice of them. I mean, they're gone, but away they go. And it stopped. Well, then it's coming down. Because when the engine, it was like a pulse ship. And when it quit, so everybody in the given area dove for whatever protection they could get on the side of the road. When my dad crawled back out of the ditch, there was a boot with a foot in it. Sitting on the edge of the road. They were rough. The other thing they used to do, and any of you who were attached to the associated with the Air Force, we were, as kids, we were all playing cricket one day, and naturally in England, what else would you play? But we heard this doodlebug coming, which we took absolutely no notice of, being probably miles from the centre of London. And we heard this noise come, which I'd never heard before. It was one of the first jet fighters I'd ever seen. And they used to fly alongside and get their wing under the doodlebug's stubby wings, and then peel off and tip the doodlebug into the farmland. And this is what he did, very close to us. So all the kids just scrambled to get out of the way, and there was one hell of an explosion. And it ruined a beautiful oak tree, which is always sad, and we just got up and went on playing cricket. You know, it became one of those accepted facts. It was going to happen, and you never really knew.
Your brother-in-law, what did he fly? He was your brother-in-law.
Oh yeah, I had a brother ended up in Vancouver actually. He flew Lancasters and did quite a number of trips over to Europe during the war. And then after the war he got on ferry command, and they ferried planes from various places around the world back to England, back to wherever they had to go. And he said that was interesting because in some cases all the controls were in foreign language. So you know, but there's endless stories, believe me.
Wow, those are really interesting.
Does anyone else have a memory to share, or? Well, it's been a very, the thoughts of the veterans and all your hard work.